Good morning, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. As you can say, I would love to say that I was in the Dolomites. Actually, I'm sitting in my spare room in Cambridge, in the UK. But I like to think that one day I'll get back to the mountains. But anyway, so as I say, it's a pleasure to be here. We thought we'd do something a little bit different rather than do a kind of presentation. Petra and I thought we'd have a bit of a conversation about the challenges that are facing legacy banks. I mean, legacy banks itself, that name sounds pretty negative, doesn't it? It's and I think when I think about being inside of a big established mainstream bank, once upon a time that was a tremendous position to be in. There's a kind of security, there's a safeness, a safety associated with being a very big, well-established bank. But over the course of the last 5 years in particular, we've seen this whole group of neobanks, of new bank challengers emerge. And the more established banks have struggled to react to that because those neobanks can move faster, they can make changes more quickly, and typically they're also digital first. And I think all of us have been surprised at the speed at which the digital channel has become the predominant channel for consumer banking and business banking. And of course, the pandemic has only accelerated that trend further. So we thought today we'd talk a little bit about what banks can do about that. And I thought I'd kick off, Petru, by asking actually about not the neobanks themselves, but looking a bit further afield. When we look to technology platforms like Alipay and Wechat Pay, I mean, these are lifestyle apps that happen to have financial services built into them. They have insurance, they have shopping, they have bill payments, they have savings, they have current accounts, they have loans. What can we learn from Wechat and Alipay, do you think, when we're talking about being more established banks?
So I think, first of all, there is a big expectation from the younger generation to have one app where they can do everything in it. To interact with their friends, to split payments, to pay for their travel, to do whatever the life circumstances throw in front of younger generation. The experience with WeChat and Alipay, first of all, it's probably one of the largest wallets in the world, and they have more than 600 million users in the ecosystem. So it's not just a digital experience, it's also an ecosystem that allows everyone to participate into that. And what we can learn from that is that the banks probably can become something like that. So they can offer more services, especially the one that they already own, in one single area, so one single app, and also integrate additional services from others to offer a good lifestyle experience for their users.
So you're talking about banks becoming ecosystem providers?
Ecosystem providers, yeah, correct. It's a big mindset shift to achieve that, but we think the neobanks are doing exactly the same thing. So they don't build their own systems to provide all those insurance and other things. They integrate and they accelerate delivery and provide multiple services in one app. So they become like mega apps with lots of functions in it.
But that's really interesting, actually, because you bring up the neobanks shadowing what those lifestyle applications are doing. And I mean, one example of that I think that's really interesting is when I look at Revolut. They started out as being a kind of vanilla neobank, but they're now getting into all sorts of things. So you can manage investments, you can buy and sell crypto. They've recently become their own payments acquirer, so they can, They can start offering business banking and merchant payments and so on. So that's all predicated on the idea that they own this relationship with the consumer, with the customer. But surely banks, I mean, they already have these very well-established relationships with their own customers. So aren't they starting from a position of real strength?
Yeah, so so it's worth mentioning that the banks already have a big, let's say, all-established portfolio of customers. But the new entrants, they are just, let's say, using the inefficiencies of the banks. Yeah, so the the experience with a neobank is much better. So I can give multiple examples for cross-border payments, for example,
Yeah.
or for peer-to-peer payments, or for even card issuing and onboarding. So all those are just better because they put customer experience as one of the main, let's say, focus when they build a service and a solution. It's also important to mention that the neobanks are a bit, they have an advantage. So they don't have a legacy. They also have less regulation or less, let's say, strengths attached, and they can move a bit faster. Plus technology is in their core. So they look at it more like a technology company and build things faster using all the latest technology, and they can scale massively overnight. So they can use all the cloud infrastructure, all the DevOps capability, and deliver just everyday new functionalities. I think that's.
And I'd like to come back to that in a little bit, but I mean, that sounds like a tale of what if I was sitting in a more established bank, I'd be pretty concerned. Are there any advantages? Is there anything that more established banks can do that that these more fleet of foot platforms can't do?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the banks, they have already started. So the let's say, matching experience and looking how to provide better digital services and how to offer more products in one integrated way. It's on top of the agenda. Payments actually being one of the key drivers to move things forward and do transformation inside of the banks. And I think what the banks can do is focus more on customer experience. One. Second is, even if there are lots of legacy systems behind, so mainframe type of platforms, I think just doing an API layer between and creating an abstractization and making it easy to consume those services, plus creating centralized functions and splitting let's say, the services in the bank into multiple services that can be consumed by all different hubs in the bank. So, for example, in the payments, it can be 40, 30 applications that consume payment services. That can help to provide better services faster, change faster, and stay compliant as well.
And I guess the other thing to kind of focus on is that although I mean, there's understandably a lot of attention on neobanks and lifestyle apps, but they are particularly attractive to a younger generation. I mean, there's an old. We mustn't forget, banking covers the whole spread of age and social groups and so on. So there's also there's a huge number of customers for whom a shiny Alipay experience isn't really appropriate. So I mean, when I think about being an established bank, of course we need to track what the neobanks are doing, but there are some strengths that I think are worth reiterating. There's the kind of depth and longevity of the relationships they've got with some of their customers. And also, I mean, we can't have a conversation about the future of financial services without talking about data. And established banks have got richer sets of data about consumers, about businesses than anybody else. So all is not lost. There's a tremendous set of assets here for legacy banks that they can leverage. But as you say, there's a couple of kind of key features, and I think I think one core competency that has traditionally been missing in established banks is user experience, engineering for user experience. And it's not just the kind of, the shiny, user interface on top of online banking. This is also about kind of business process and about the deeper sets of expectations that banks that customers and clients have on their provider. How do legacy banks go about changing their user experience? What have Endava done to help in that space?
I think you're opening the kind of the right questions here. So it's not about only reskinning and making it look nice. It's also providing analytics through data, helping the let's say consumers to make their own decisions based on their consumer behavior. Also having transparency and fee very clear shown in the app, having self-services, so on everything that you want to change, freeze your card, do location-based function, or let's say if you are traveling to secure your card only for specific use, or having exchanges, having lots of different functions, and all this should be self-service. Also anticipating potential problems, so not throwing into, let's say, operations too much of the exceptions handling, because that takes quite a lot of time and the customer experience is not great. So thinking about how to solve the and automate the operations, it's what we typically do in the banks, and majority they have they struggle. So lots of people, lots of processes, but the experience and customer experience is not great. So requires automation and faster reaction to problems and anticipation.
So this isn't, so actually, hearing you talk about that, Petru, this isn't just an engineering challenge, right? This isn't just a technology challenge. This is a mindset challenge for the established banks, that if they want to keep up, it's not just about changing the technology platform they're running on, but it's actually changing the way they think about their internal processes and making sure that customers are at the center of those processes, rather than being a sort of inconvenient thing that gets in the way of their kind of smooth Six Sigma business process engineering.
Yeah, correct. So I'm customer of one of the largest bank in the world, and my experience when I had a problem, ATM withdrawal, for example, and didn't receive the cash, and I'm not supposed to do that because I'm looking more to digital services, but I had immediate issue. And to solve the problem, I had to interact with bots first, with people after that, call, and it took me 7 days to raise a dispute and so on. So it's a very long process to solve, let's say, relatively straightforward issue. But there are much more complicated scenarios when the customer experience can go very wrong, and too many calls on customer service can be, let's say, a bad experience end to end. And I think looking operational, looking how to make all those let's say services to work well, and especially not on the happy path only, but testing all the time, making sure it's very clear how to operate that, checking upfront. So Plaid example, why Plaid is so successful in the US, yeah. And not only, it's because they provide a service to check the beneficiary account before you send the money. So you actually have something that can reduce the number of exceptions in the payment ecosystem. And they solve this problem. It's just an integration to offer this service inside the bank. Doesn't exist something similar, let's say, in all the markets, but there can be other solutions to be implemented.
And I touched earlier on the idea that banks are sitting on this vast pool of data. There's an example I just wanted to share as an example in which banks should be able to outcompete and yet really get in their own way. I won't say which bank this is, but I worked with a European bank recently. They really want to accelerate their payments capability. They see that, like many organizations, they see payments as a tremendous opportunity to both deepen their relationship with consumers and also build relationships with businesses. And this bank has hundreds of thousands of business banking customers, and it knows so much about their businesses. But rather than just enable payments acceptance capability for those businesses, it was insisting on re-diligencing every customer before they were able to take payments. Now, if I were a neobank and I had access to all of that historical data, I'd be getting my data scientists to build models that meant that, I could have, at the very least, unbelievably accelerated boarding processes, but ideally just pre-approval, right? You just say, well, 97% of this base is just pre-approved, and we'll switch the, if you want payments, we'll flick the switch and you can have the payment. And I think for me, that it's as much that kind of mind shift switch that needs to occur as any kind of technology solution. But I wanted to come back to something that you said, Petru, about kind of bringing in services from other people, because you and I were talking yesterday when we were preparing for this session, and you mentioned an unbelievable statistic to me about the percentage of technology resources that legacy banks are spending on kind of compliance and keep the show on the road style changes. And remind me what that number was.
So the staying compliance. First of all, I'm speaking with lots of banks and working with them directly, and majority of the pain point is that 90% of the budget in IT is spent to stay compliant, so to stay in the game and change things that come from compliance and regulatory environments. And majority of that is, first of all, because of let's say change that is constant in from the regulation perspective, but also the banks are not building their systems in a way that will adapt faster to change. So they know change is coming every year, but they should just prepare things to make it easier going forward. Easier said than done, but the problem is still there. So it's a big problem, and only 5% or 10% of the budget remain to build new innovation projects or to invest in some new services. And of course, that's a big, let's say, disadvantage. And what we are doing is we are flipping that. So we are helping the banks to engineer their technology in a way that can reduce massively the cost on staying compliant or just solving operational issues or things like that.
So how are you doing that? What are you're moving them away from their own legacy infrastructures and moving towards basically consuming services from somebody else?
Yeah, so a big part of the implementations that we are doing is migration to composite banking type of platform. So banking as a service providers, but not only. So in a bank, you will have multiple needs. So it's the core banking part, is the issuing part, and the acquiring part. And what we're doing, we look how to migrate all those services into new cloud-based infrastructure. This comes with other set of challenges. So regulation is saying that there should be multiple cloud providers. You shouldn't link all your, let's say, infrastructure to one vendor and so on. You should have an option to move between vendors when there is an unplanned need for that. And I think that's where we come and looking strategically how the bank can migrate and use those new scalable platforms and easy to use, easy to change. For some of them, we are even building those core capabilities.
So just so that I'm understanding that, I mean, basically this is a new model, right? For traditionally banks like to control everything about their service, so they ran things in their own data centers. The processes went through their own people. Whereas what we're seeing now is that actually the organizations that are really winning are those that actually decide, well, what's our core competence? What's our, is it our ability to lend when other people won't? Or, can we do, do we have a better view of customers than anybody else? Or can we provide a better kind of overlay of services? But but then they delegate essentially other capabilities to a provider, and they just the key is kind of pulling all of those things together. The word of the moment seems to be kind of service orchestration. This idea that the bank in the middle is like the conductor conducting the orchestra of different instruments, and some of those instruments are in-house, but a lot of the services, a lot of the instruments are neobanks or are new providers, and these services are in the cloud. Have I got that right?
Yes, that's correct. So, and there is no kind of big advantage to have it in your own infrastructure. So just having it in the cloud comes with lots of other advantages as well. So first of all, scalability, using more powerful services, and using as much as you need with your growth potential. Let's say if you grow, you just add more resources anytime. You don't have to spend too much time on that. Also moving to infrastructure as a code, spinning as many environments as you need, and just focusing all the effort in building the front-end services for consumers. So not in necessarily the services that are not visible, but more on the front end. You're right, it's an orchestration concept that is the right wording, but it's also integration with many providers that can help to enhance that value proposition. So behind the scene, you integrate with multiple vendors, but in the front end, you just provide services that are the best services for customers.
And when I'm in the middle of that as a bank, I guess the other thing that's a huge advantage of moving towards having multiple services is that I'm moving the compliance cost off to those other organizations. But also, if I build it right, if I find a service provider isn't performing, I can change out that I can just consume service from somebody else, right? I mean, in fact, I guess best practice is probably to have multiple providers for each component in the first place, because then you can play people off on price, and it also means you've got increased reliability, because if somebody's service is degraded, you can shift volume to someone else. And certainly in the payment space, which is the area I'm closest to, we see that a lot now. We see this idea of there being somebody sitting behind payment acceptance service, and looking in real time or in near real time at who's offering the best authorization rate, or who's offering the best authentication rate, or who's offering the best price.
Yeah, it's called payments orchestration engines that are very in demand currently, with a smart routing mechanism implemented. It can work in acceptance. It can work in the orchestration of the payments rails in the bank. So you can decide based on your let's say amount, the value, and the type of payment that you have. It's a cross-border or a local one, where to route the payment, and what is the best option for that. So I think it works in almost any environment currently. The intelligence to have, let's say, better acceptance or better positive scenarios, I think, is the one that helps to reduce the number of exceptions and reduce the number of work for operational teams, and that's kind of critical for the success.
And then if we look back to what we can learn from neobanks and from the kind of lifestyle applications that, by the way, when I talk about Alipay and Wechat Pay, I mean, it's worth saying that those are for in China, for example, those are the mainstream banking applications. They're not lifestyle applications which are also doing some financial services. The majority of people's financial life sits inside of these these ecosystems. But they are also, they're not just adding on financial services, they're adding on, kind of other kind of adjacent services. So things like digital receipts and loyalty provision. And we know loyalty, if we look to the US, loyalty remains at the heart of banking and payments experiences, because interchange fees in the US allow card issuers to fund big rewards programs, points. Is that something that legacy banks should be thinking about, this kind of wider ecosystem of services?
Absolutely. So I call this ecosystem concept marketplace. So an area where the bank can allow other vendors to provide different services to enhance the value proposition for the end consumer. And in a way, you don't have to work on your own to build all those services. So there can be multiple other smaller organizations, but that are very focused to solve a specific problem well. So digital receipts, wallets, or linking your card and receive loyalty points or cashback or anything when you shop, that's a value add that can make customers sticky. And I think it's exactly where the banks should look more attentively to create happy customers, to bring more value and make them more satisfied
and of course this
for
comes
their choice.
in the end, this comes back to data, right? Because it's the data that allows you to create these compelling offers. It's the data that allows you to build these experiences. So, when I think about the kind of question we set ourselves, which is, well, how do banks even set off on this journey? People on the call may well be thinking, well, this is all great, Nick, but we've got mainframes being developed, by developers who are in their 60s and 70s, and it's not easy for us to move. It feels to me like the key component in all of this is that banks have to get their data under control. They have to understand what they've got. They have to be able to describe what they've got, and they have to be able to curate and manage that. And if they've got a really good grip on who their customers are and what their customers do, then the rest of the kind of service orchestration and plugging in these external providers, I mean, it's an engineering challenge, but it's not an impossible journey.
Yeah, and so we see the data as key aspect in a bank to provide better services. So, data is at the core of successful banks. And one of the problems that you mentioned, Nick, in the, I think, payments organization was KYC, KYB checks and faster onboarding. With data, actually, you can enhance that experience. So if the customers, let's say, have a bank account with you, you can after that onboard or offer other services without onboarding them again for mortgages, for loans, for other complementary service. Yeah, because you already have history with the client, and you can provide even better rates and upsell other products without the hurdle to again onboard and collect the same set of data without a real need. And we see this happening in majority of the legacy banks or older banks, mainly because it is structured in a way that it's like multiple verticals, multiple sub businesses, and they have own technology stack. So it requires a new onboarding. It's like a new experience for the customer.
And we, last question before we take a question or two, I hope. But there's a huge move here in Europe towards open banking. So this idea that banks provide mechanisms by which third parties can consume data about customers, so a kind of account information, and also do things like payment initiation, so operate on people's accounts, people and businesses' accounts. So we've got the open banking initiative here in the UK. But there's the STET group based out of France, and you've got the Berlin group. on the one hand, open banking feels to me, really exciting, and it allows this opportunity to kind of share data. But how should established banks think about this? Because isn't this just an opportunity for nimbler, faster providers to access data about their customers? So in other words, kind of take advantage of this deep well of information about customers, and then react quickly by building services on top. So how should established banks think about open banking?
Yeah, so open banking will have let's say two layers of complexity. First of all, it's for the PISP service, the payment initiation services. It's a direct competitor with the issuing part of the bank. So there will be less traffic on the issuing side, and it can reduce some revenue. But in the long run, of course, the data is more important than just making now in the near term some money on the issuing. And providing and selling more services using the customer data is very powerful. So I think making it open and transparent and providing more services to the customers, how the banks should play that. So we call that open finance, and we help the banks to achieve that. So to open their APIs, not only for the PSP or ASP services, which are mandated, but open for anything else. So payments was just an example, but it can be mortgages, loans, investments, FX, all the wealth management and so on. So all the APIs driven services are the future. And that's how I see the shift in the US market, which is not mandated by the government. They are running a completely different journey for their open banking strategy. So opening all those APIs and becoming the Stripes type of experience for the, let's say, developers to integrate those services and create some other services on top for consumers and businesses.
Well, Petru, I think we've only got like 3 or 4 minutes of time left, so I guess we need to stop there. Great to talk with you as ever. We didn't even begin to get into what you might be able to do with decentralized finance, so smart contracts that that can act on all of this data that's available, and of course we didn't talk about crypto at all, which is probably a good thing. I'm sure you guys are going to talk about crypto 1,000 times over the course of the next 2 days. But it seems to me like if I was sitting in as I have done, if I was sitting in a legacy established bank, I'd be making sure that I'd be absolutely on top of my data. If I hadn't already hired data scientists and data engineers, I'd be paying whatever it took to hire those data scientists, and I'd be thinking about moving as much of the stuff that costs me money in terms of kind of compliance changes out of my own infrastructure and making it somebody else's problem, and concentrating on that relationship with customers, whether they're personal banking or business banking. Sergio, over to you. It would be great to have a question or two.
Thank you, Nick. Thank you, Petru. Very, very interesting interview, and I really love the format and all the data, all the insights you have shared were awesome. I don't see questions yet, but I think that you have touched base very relevant points like building banking ecosystems, integrating third parties, which is a mindset changing for legacy banks. Also being customer centric, with changing also not only the skin or the front, but also the business processes, the data, the user journeys. Thinking about what happens when you are not in the happy path. I think that we all of us, we have suffered it as a consumer, not only in banking, but in any other sector. If everything goes straight, then it's happy path. Then if something goes wrong, as Petru was mentioning, then you start struggling here and there. And sometimes you have the feeling that you have to do with, like in the old days with Windows, no? Shut down, start again, and then everything will go fine, hopefully. Also talking about service orchestration, marketplaces, and data, a lot of insights about data. I have a question here. Maybe you can elaborate a little bit more, because
Sure.
in my experience, legacy bankings, as you mentioned, they have tons of data. In most cases, they have the data in silos. Electronic banking has its own data. Call center has its own data. Branches have their own data, and then whenever you want to do something with that data, or you want to expose it in a cloud-based solution, then the question that arises is like, which one is the right data? No, because you might end up with 3 or 4 mobile phones numbers, for instance. Because at the very beginning, the customer provided one for the branch, then another one a few years later for the electronic banking, another one, and then sort of did you in your experience see that before doing anything with data, or even moving with data analysts and scientists and so forth, there is a phase of housekeeping and data cleaning and figuring out which one is the right data there?
Yeah, and I mean, so I'll come to Petru in just a second, but there's hard work to be done here, and it's not necessarily technologists. This is actually the work of the traditional business analyst in the first place. This is actually doing that hard work of building the data dictionary for the organization, so that there's a common understanding, as you say, between the people that run the branches and the people that run the head office and the people that run the payment services and the people, because inevitably, businesses have grown banks have grown by acquisition. They've grown different, traditionally the retail bank and the commercial bank didn't really talk to each other. So there's a human piece of work, which is just building these data dictionaries, and there's tooling that can help, but this is the domain of data governance, which is not very sexy, but is absolutely critical to be able to then kind of go and do the data cleaning and and data quality management and so on. Petru, what do you think?
Yeah, I'm thinking when you just mentioned about those typical problems, I'm thinking more holistically. So data, it's a big problem not only for the structure of data, so if it's good quality of data, but also who owns the data, who has access, who should have access, and to make sure that data is not just spread everywhere and there is no logical interlink between those data. And it's a big work before mining the data and providing intelligence on top to make sure the data is, all organized and done, so prepared to be used well. I'm thinking also about the company which is called Palantir. Maybe some of you have heard about that. So they provide analytics for the governments, but they are now moving into commerce, and they solve exactly those kind of problems. So different sources, who owns the data, where the data sits, and I think that's kind of the future of the.
But it's worth saying, in the end, there's tooling that can help this process, but this is still all about the knowledge that's in people's heads inside the banks, so that they can put real meaning on the underlying data. And that's neobanks don't have an advantage over real banks there. In fact, maybe even the reverse. There's most established banks. We've all worked with those colleagues who really understand why in 1986 we started using this data field to do this thing. So it says account number on it, but actually that if it starts with a 7, it means that actually they're an executive user or a premium user, and that's never been written down. And capturing that knowledge, that human understanding, that's the critical step, because if you've captured that knowledge and you're able to share it, then you're in a position to take advantage of it.